Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah and I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. What we're going to learn here is everything that a beginner knitter will need to know in the first few months of knitting. And don't worry, I'm not going to overwhelm you. It's just a few abbreviations that I would recommend that you first of all learn and most importantly practice with before you try to do anything more complicated. So the first thing is P, the purl stitch. As you can see, once you've learnt a few stitches, you will be doing stocking stitch. And stocking stitch is where you alternate knit rows and purl rows. And when you have this textured side in front of you when you're knitting, you're about to do a purl row. So we're doing purl stitch on this row. And the purl stitch is created with the right hand needle going in front of the left hand needle through the stitch from right to left, and the yarn goes around. And you pull the loop through and drop the stitch off the left hand needle. Do that again. The right hand needle goes in front of the left hand needle through that stitch. The yarn goes around, pull that loop through, and the stitch is dropped off of the left hand needle. So I'll just do a couple more of these purl stitches. And one more thing you need to know on a purl row if you're a beginner knitter is P2 tog, which is purl 2 stitches together. And to do that is pretty much the same, except for instead of going through one stitch, you pick up 2 stitches at the same time. And then you move your yarn around, pull that loop through and drop both of those stitches off the needle at once. And they're both caught in that loop so that you're not going to lose one. There you go. So we've just done purl 2 stitches together. I can do one more of those on this row. The needle goes through both of these next 2 stitches that are on the needle. The yarn goes around, we pull that loop through, and those 2 stitches are dropped off of the left hand needle at once. There we go. So that is mostly all you'd need on a purl row if you're just starting to knit. So then we have the knit side of stitch, the knit stitch side of knitting. And this is stocking stitch. As you can see, we have a much smoother side here on this side of the knitting. So we have a good indication of which stitch comes next. This side is facing you means basically that all of these stitches on here, unless you're doing a textured pattern, will be knitted. So for the knit stitch, we do exactly as we did with the purl. We do 1 stitch at a time. The needle goes through the needle on the the right hand needle goes through the stitch on the left hand needle, and instead of going in front, it goes behind this time. So we go through the stitch, the yarn goes around, and the yarn is dropped off. There. We do a few more of those. The needle goes into that stitch on the left hand needle, yarn goes around, pull the loop through and drop that stitch off. There we go. And then we can repeat what we did on the other side. Instead of P2 tog, it's K2 tog, which is knit 2 together. So instead of coming from the right hand side and picking up 2 stitches, we come from the left hand side and pick up 2 stitches. Move the yarn around, pull the loop through and drop those 2 stitches there. And I'll do another couple of knit stitches, and then we'll do the same again. From the left hand side, the needle goes into both of those stitches, the yarn goes around, and we can drop those stitches off the left hand needle and they're caught in that stitch. So we have knit 2 together, K2 tog. And the last thing I would say that beginners may come across, probably after they've done a few patterns, so this is most unlikely to appear in your first pattern unless you've done for something rather complicated, and that is make one, abbreviated to M1. And by doing this, you're creating a stitch from nowhere. But we have a lot of yarn here, there's a lot of stitches, so we can use what we've done on the previous row to make one stitch. And that is this little piece of yarn that joins up the previous row's stitches here. So that, if I pull on that, you can see that it's attached to this stitch here. I'm going to pull this stitch and then this ladder, this step of the ladder here, and push it onto the left hand needle. I'm going to move the left hand needle around and just drop that stitch on there. So we've created a stitch. Now we have to knit it because it's on the left hand needle. So I'm going to, instead of using this loop here, which would just mean we have a gaping hole, we knit into the back of this loop. So you can see there my right hand needle is going into the back of that stitch. I move the yarn around, pull the loop through and drop that created stitch off of the left hand needle. And you can see now, if I knit a couple of stitches, that there's not a big hole. It looks relatively just placed there without a big fuss. And I do a couple more stitches and then we'll do another make one. So we pick up that strand of yarn in between the two stitches on the previous row and we make one by putting it on the left hand needle. We then move the right hand needle and knit into the back of it so that it's slightly twisted, so that it is twisted. The yarn from the right hand goes round there, pull that loop through, and then we can drop that created stitch, just as we would do if we were knitting. There you go. So we have done purl. We have done purl 2 tog, purl 2 together. We have done K, which is knit. We've done K2 tog, knit 2 stitches together, and we have done make one, M1. And usually if you come across M1, especially for new knitters, I would say pretty much 95% of the time a make one will be made on the knit row, so we don't have to worry about making one on the purl row. There we go, that's that. I think that's a pretty good jargon busting beginner's knitters guide there. Thank you for joining me. Do look me up on Instagram and Facebook. I'm there at Knit with Hannah and we can have a chat. I'd love to see what you're knitting, and yeah, do like and subscribe to this YouTube channel as well, so you can have one coming up through your notifications every week. Of course, if you're on my blog, then you'll be getting an email anyway. So thank you very much and I'll see you next time. Happy knitting!